My name is Alina Sterling. In my family, love was always measured in net worth and dividends. When my parents read my grandmother's will, they made their choice clear. My golden boy brother, Julian, received the liquid assets and the controlling shares of the family corporation. I was given a garbage heap, a neglected, barren plot of land on the edge of the city that had been a dumping ground for decades. They laughed as they handed me the deed, calling it a hobby for the black sheep. But they forgot one thing. Grandma Beatrice didn't believe in accidents. Hidden beneath the silt and rusted iron of that lot was a legal clause they overlooked and a geological secret that would turn my wasteland into the most coveted soil on the continent. Now I'm standing on a fortune of $30 million, and for the first time in my life, the gates are locked from the inside. The air in the lawyer's office was thick with the scent of old paper and my father's expensive cologne. I sat in the hard wooden chair, positioned strategically outside the inner circle of the mahogany desk. My brother Julian sat front and center, already wearing the smirk of a king-elect. My parents didn't look at me. They were too busy whispering about the new era of Sterling Industries. To them, I was just a clerical error in their perfect lineage, the daughter who preferred geology books to gala invites. "To Julian," the attorney read, his voice droning like a funeral bell. "I bequeath 60% of the Sterling Corp shares and the primary estate in Highwood. To my son Arthur and his wife Margaret, the remaining liquid capital and the summer home in Antibes." Julian leaned back, tapping his fingers on his knee. He didn't even try to hide his triumph. He looked at me, his eyes dancing with a cruel sort of pity. My mother patted his hand, her face glowing with pride. It was the same look I'd spent 25 years trying to earn, only to realize it was a currency I'd never possess. "And finally," the attorney continued, clearing his throat awkwardly, "to my granddaughter, Elena, I leave the parcel of land known as Lot 402 on the eastern periphery, along with all associated rights, titles, and interests as specified in the private annex." My father let out a short, dry laugh. "Ha, Lot 402, that's the old scrapyard. It's been a tax sink for 30 years. I suppose it's fitting. Beatrice always had a strange sense of humor. It's a place for things that don't fit anywhere else." "It's a dump, Elena," Julian added, his voice dripping with condescension. "But hey, maybe you can start a community garden or a landfill. It matches your aesthetic." My mother sighed, looking at her manicured nails. "We tried to convince her to leave you something more usable, dear. No, you were always so distant. Take it as a lesson in the value of family loyalty." I took the deed from the lawyer's hand. The paper felt heavy, vibrating with a significance they couldn't perceive. I didn't cry, I didn't argue. I had spent my life studying the earth, learning that the most valuable things are often buried under layers of pressure and time. My grandmother had been the only person who ever took me seriously. She knew I spent my weekends in the university labs, analyzing soil samples, while Julian was crashing sports cars. "I accept the bequest," I said, my voice steady. "Good," said my father, standing up and adjusting his suit. "Now that the business is concluded, we have a celebratory dinner at the club. Julian needs to meet the board." "Am I invited?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "It's a business dinner, Elena," my mother said, not meeting my eyes. "Perhaps another time. Enjoy your plot." They walked out without a second glance, leaving me alone in the sterile room. I looked down at the private annex attached to the deed. Most of it was standard legal jargon, but one clause was highlighted in Grandma's shaky, elegant script. "The surface is for the blind, Elena. The depths are for those who know how to look. This deed includes full mineral and subsoil rights, unseverable and absolute." I drove out to lot 402 that evening. It was worse than Julian had described. Rusted shipping containers, piles of old tires, and gray, compacted soil that looked like it couldn't grow a weed, let alone a future. It was a scar on the landscape, surrounded by high chain-link fences and the hum of the nearby highway. But I didn't see the trash. I pulled a soil auger from my trunk and walked to the very center of the lot. I remembered Grandma's stories about the old vein, a geological anomaly that the Sterling surveyors had dismissed in the 50s as a fluke. I spent the next 3 months living in a trailer on that site. My parents stopped calling. Julian blocked my number after I refused to sign a liability waiver that would have given the company the right to use my lot for industrial runoff. They thought I was having a breakdown. They told the family friends that I had gone off the grid to deal with my grief. In reality, I was working. I cleared the surface debris by hand, hired a private drilling crew with the last of my savings, and kept the gates locked. I was looking for lithium-6 isotopes and rare earth yttrium, minerals that the modern tech world was starving for. One rainy Tuesday in November, the lead driller called me over to the rig. He was holding a core sample that looked different from the gray silt of the upper layers. It was dark, crystalline, and shimmering with a faint metallic violet hue. I took the sample to the university lab myself. I stayed up all night running the mass spectrometer, my heart hammering against my ribs. When the results flashed on the screen, I had to sit down. It wasn't just rare minerals. It was a massive, untapped deposit of coltan Z, a rare superconductor component that had only been found in trace amounts in the Congo. Based on the core depth and the density of the vein, the estimate for my garbage heap was $30 million, and that's just the initial valuation. I didn't call my parents. I didn't tell Julian. I contacted a Tier 1 mining law firm and secured the site with a private security detail. I spent the next month quietly finalizing the extraction permits. I watched from my trailer as the Sterling Corp stock began to flicker. Julian was struggling. He had over-leveraged the company to buy a failing tech firm, and he desperately needed raw materials to fulfill their contracts. Then the news broke. Unknown independent owner discovers massive superconductor deposit on city outskirts. The phone rang within 10 minutes. It was my father. "Elena, honey, we just saw the news. There's a mistake in the coordinates, isn't there? That's the family's old peripheral lot, isn't it? The one Julian was telling you about." "It's my lot, Dad, the one you called a dump." "Now, let's not be hasty," he said, his voice shifting into that negotiator tone I hated. "We're family. Sterling Industries is perfectly positioned to help you develop that site. We can fold it back into the family trust. Julian is already drafting the merger papers. We'll have a huge celebration. Your mother is so proud." Proud of the dirt or proud of the daughter? "Don't be difficult, Elena. We're coming over now. We'll discuss the percentages. We're thinking a 70-30 split in favor of the corporation for the logistics we provide." "Don't bother coming, Dad," I said, my voice as cold as the minerals beneath my feet. "The gates are reinforced, and your names are on the permanent no-entry list." I hung up. I walked to the edge of the fence and watched as their black sedan pulled up to the gate. I saw my father get out, shouting at my security guards. I saw my mother peering through the glass, looking at the dump she had been so ashamed of. I saw Julian, red-faced and waving a stack of papers. I didn't open the gate. I didn't even wave. I turned my back on them and walked towards the core of my empire. Grandma was right. The surface is for the blind, and for the first time in my life, I could see everything perfectly.
My father once told me that the law is like clay. It can be molded into any shape if you have enough heat and pressure. He forgot that I spent my life studying rocks that have survived millions of years of both. After the gates closed on them, I expected a quiet war of lawyers and paperwork. I didn't expect the full-scale corporate siege that followed. They didn't just want the minerals, they wanted to crush the girl who dared to say no to the Sterling patriarch. But every shovel of dirt I moved only made my resolve harder. The first legal volley arrived at 8 a.m. the following morning. Not a phone call, but a process server standing at the perimeter fence. Julian had filed an emergency injunction to halt all drilling on Lot 402. The claim? Environmental endangerment and mental incompetence of the title holder. They were trying to argue that my grandmother hadn't been of sound mind when she signed the annex, and that I was recklessly damaging the city's ecological fringe. I sat in my trailer sipping bitter coffee as my lawyer, Marcus Thorne, no relation to my past life's enemies, just a man with a sharp mind for property law, looked over the documents. "They're desperate, Elena," Marcus said, leaning back. "They're not trying to win a case. They're trying to bleed you dry with legal fees and delays. If the drills stop for more than a month, your extraction permits expire. They're trying to time you out." "They think I'm still the girl who waits for an allowance," I said, looking at the violet core sample on my desk. "They don't realize I've already secured private funding from the Global Tech Consortium. My pockets are as deep as this vein now." By noon, the media was back. My mother had done an interview with a local lifestyle magazine, draped in pearls, looking tragically into the camera. She spoke about her troubled daughter, who was suffering from a manic episode and hoarding family assets while living in a trailer like a vagrant. "We just want her to come home," she whimpered on screen. "We want her to get the help she needs. The land isn't important, her soul is." It was a classic Sterling move. Poison the well so no one else wants to drink from it. They wanted the consortium to think I was a liability, a PR nightmare they should distance themselves from. I didn't release a statement. Instead, I invited the CEO of Aether Systems, Sterling Industries' biggest rival, to the site. His name was Silas Vane, a man who built his empire on the very superconductors I was sitting on. We met in the mud, surrounded by the roar of the generators. Silas didn't care about my manic episode or my mother's pearls. He looked at the spectrometry reports and then at the gray horizon. "Your father called me this morning," Silas said, his voice barely audible over the machinery. "He basically asked me to help him mediate this family dispute. He offered me a sweetheart deal on refined materials if I helped him steal this from you." "And what did you say?" I asked. "I told him I don't negotiate with middlemen," Silas smiled, a predatory glint in his eyes. "I want the source. I'll provide the heavy security, the legal shield, and the transport. In exchange, I want a 5-year exclusive buy option at market rates, no discounts. 10% above market rates, because you know as well as I do that once this hits the global exchange, the price of Coltan Z is going to double. And I want the security team to be yours, not a third party. I want it made clear to the Sterlings that an attack on this lot is an attack on Aether Systems." Silas laughed, a genuine sound of appreciation. "You really are Beatrice's granddaughter. She always said you were the only one with iron in your blood. Deal." The siege shifted within 48 hours. When Julian's private investigators tried to trespass on the north side of the fence, they didn't find a lone girl in a trailer. They found a phalanx of Aether security in tactical gear. When my father tried to call the mayor to discuss zoning issues, he found that the mayor's office was already celebrating the massive tax windfall the Aether-Sterling partnership was bringing to the city. The heat was moving from me to them. Friday evening, I heard a car idling at the gate. It wasn't the Bentley. It was Julian's sports car. He was alone. I signaled the guards to let him speak through the intercom, but I didn't open the gate. "Elena, open this damn door," he yelled, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and panic. "The board is breathing down Dad's neck. Our stock is tanking because the market knows you've signed with Vane. Do you have any idea what you're doing to the family legacy? The legacy you called a garbage heap? The one you laughed at during the reading of the will? You didn't want the legacy, Julian. You wanted the easy win. You wanted the shares and the mansions while I got the dirt. Well, the dirt has a better ROI than your failing tech firm. We can rewrite the contract, Julian pleaded, leaning his forehead against the cold chain-link fence. Dad says he'll give you a seat on the board. We'll give you 15% of the corporation. Just break the deal with Vane. He's a shark, Alina. He'll eat you alive. I'm already in the water, Julian, and the only thing I see drowning is Sterling Industries. You didn't care when I was distant. You didn't care when I was broke. You only care now because the black sheep just bought the whole flock. You're a monster, he hissed, the desperation finally turning back into spite. You're destroying your own parents. Mom is sick with worry. Mom is sick because her social circle is asking why her daughter won't let her in. I corrected him. Go home, Julian, and tell Dad to stop the lawsuits. If he files one more injunction, I'll release the environmental reports from 10 years ago, the ones that prove Sterling Industries was illegally dumping chemicals on this very lot to keep the property value low so they could buy the surrounding land. I found the barrels, Julian. They're right under the violet vein. The silence on the other end was absolute. I watched his taillights fade into the distance. The corporate siege wasn't over, but the first wall had fallen. I looked down at the ground, the soil they had poisoned, the land they had mocked. It had kept my secrets, and in return, it was giving me the world. I walked back to the trailer and picked up a pen. It was time to sign the final contract with Silas Vane. It was time to stop being a daughter and start being a titan.
There is a rhythm to the earth that most people never hear. It's a slow, grinding pulse of tectonic plates and mineral shifts. But when the heavy machinery arrived, that rhythm was replaced by the roar of progress. Extraction is a violent process. You have to break the surface to reach the soul. As the first tons of violet-tinted ore were lifted from the depths, I realized that my family's desperation had moved beyond the courtroom. They weren't just looking for a legal loophole anymore. They were looking for a way to steal the very essence of my discovery. The first week of full-scale extraction was a blur of steel and adrenaline. Silas Vane's team worked with surgical precision, carving into the earth as if they were performing an autopsy on a god. Every truck that left the site carried nearly $1 million in raw coltan Z. The garbage heap was now the most productive square mile in the country. I moved from the trailer into a reinforced modular command center. I had to. The threats weren't just coming from lawyers anymore. Drone sightings were a nightly occurrence, and my cybersecurity team was blocking hundreds of attempts to breach our local servers. My father didn't just want the land, he wanted the proprietary refinement data, the recipe I had developed to stabilize the superconductor isotopes. "They're getting bolder, Alina," Silas said, stepping into the command center. He looked at the monitors showing the perimeter. A Sterling-owned shell company just bought the warehouse directly across the road. They're setting up high-gain sensors. They're trying to sniff your refinement process through the air signatures. "Let them sniff," I said, not looking up from the spectrometry logs. "The data is air-gapped. The only way they get the specifics is if they walk through that gate and take it from my hand." "Your father called a board meeting this morning," Silas added, his voice dropping. "He's telling investors that Sterling Industries has clandestinely developed a similar technology and that your discovery is actually based on stolen corporate intellectual property. He's preparing to sue for patent infringement." "He's lying," I said, a cold laugh escaping my lips. "He didn't even know what coltan Z was until I dug it up. He's trying to gaslight the entire market." "It doesn't matter if it's a lie if he can freeze your sales in a patent war for the next 5 years, Silas warned. "He's trying to choke your cash flow." I knew my father's playbook. He didn't need to win, he just needed to make sure I lost. But I had a countermove he hadn't anticipated. Among Grandma Beatrice's old papers, I had found more than just a deed. I had found a series of private letters between her and my father from 20 years ago, letters where he explicitly mocked her obsession with the peripheral dirt and signed off on a document stating that the family corporation had zero interest in any technological or mineral potential of Lot 402. I was holding the proof that he had legally abandoned any claim to the intellectual property of the land decades ago. At 2 a.m. that night, the alarms screamed. "Breach on the north sector," the security lead shouted over the comms. I watched the thermal cameras. 3 figures in black tactical gear had cut through the secondary fence, moving with a familiarity that suggested they had the blueprints to the site. They weren't after the ore. They were heading straight for the server room in the command center. "Don't engage with lethal force unless necessary," I commanded, grabbing my tablet. "I want them alive. I want to see who signs their checks." The confrontation was swift. Silas's team trapped them in the decontamination airlock. When the lights flickered on and the masks were pulled off, I wasn't surprised. The leader was a man named Miller, my father's head of corporate security for 15 years. He was the man who used to drive me to school when I was a child. "Miller," I said, walking up to the glass of the airlock, "does my father know you're moonlighting as a common thief, or is this a special assignment?" Miller looked at the floor, his face pale under the fluorescent lights. He said you were holding family property hostage, Alina. He said it was a matter of national security." "He lied to you, just like he lied to me. Check his pockets." My guards pulled a high-speed data skimmer and a set of forged Department of Energy Caesar warrants from his vest. My father hadn't just sent thieves. He had tried to frame the theft as a government-sanctioned raid. If they had succeeded, the data would have disappeared into a classified Sterling lab, and I would have been tied up in federal red tape for a decade. "Call the police," I told Silas, "and call the press. I want the world to see the Sterling security team in handcuffs on my property." By dawn, the footage was everywhere. The narrative of the troubled daughter was dead. In its place was the story of a desperate, corrupt patriarch trying to rob his own child. The Sterling Industries stock didn't just drop, it plummeted. The board of directors, realizing that Arthur Sterling had involved the company in a felony breaking and entering, finally revolted. I received a text from my mother at 7 a.m. "Alina, please. Your father is having chest pains. The police are at the house. You've made your point. Just give us the refinement data and we can make this all go away, for the sake of the family name." I didn't reply to the text. Instead, I posted a public update to The Sovereign, the news platform I had recently partnered with. The family name was buried under rusted tires and chemical waste long ago. I didn't destroy it. I simply excavated the truth of what it had become. To Arthur Sterling, the family discount is officially closed. If you want my minerals, you can buy them on the open market, if you're still out on bail. I walked to the edge of the pit, watching the giant drills bite into the violet earth. I could feel the vibrations in my boots, a steady, powerful hum of success. I wasn't just Elena Sterling, the outcast daughter. I was the owner of the future. The first $30 million had already hit my account, but as I watched the sunset reflect off the crystalline ore, I realized that the real treasure wasn't the money. It was the silence of a phone that I no longer felt the need to answer.
There is a specific kind of coldness that exists only in the high-altitude offices of the financial district. It's the chill of calculated risks and discarded loyalties. For years, I had been the invisible ghost at the edge of my family's success, the daughter who wasn't corporate enough to be invited to the table. But today, I wasn't looking for an invitation. I was coming to collect the table itself. My father's empire was built on a foundation of ego, and, as it turned out, ego is a very poor structural support when the ground starts to shift. The elevator ride to the 50th floor of Sterling Towers felt like a countdown.
I was wearing a suit that cost more than my trailer, and my hair was pulled back with a precision that would have made my mother proud if she weren't currently at home hiding from the paparazzi. Behind me stood Silas Vane and a phalanx of attorneys. "You're sure about this?" Silas asked, his voice low. "You could just let them sink. You have the minerals. You don't need their headache of a company." "It's not about the money, Silas," I said, watching the floor numbers climb. "It's about the soil. Sterling Industries still owns the land surrounding my lot. If I want to expand, I need their territory. And more importantly, I want my father to watch me sign the checks." The doors opened to a lobby that smelled of panic and expensive mahogany. The board of directors was already gathered in the emergency session, their voices a dull roar that died the moment I stepped into the room. My father was at the head of the table. He looked 20 years older. His suit was rumpled, and his eyes were bloodshot. Beside him, Julian was frantically typing on a laptop, looking like a cornered animal. "Elena?" my father rasped, standing up. "What is this? You can't just barge into a closed board meeting. Security!" "The security guard downstairs let me up, Dad, mostly because I now own the debt that pays his salary. And as for the closed meeting, as of 9 a.m. this morning, I'm the majority holder of your primary creditor's notes. I'm not barging in. I'm inspecting my new assets." Julian laughed, a shrill, hysterical sound. "You're delusional. You found some rocks, Elena, but you don't know the first thing about corporate finance. You can't just buy a 100-year-old company with a few weeks of mining profits." "I didn't use the profits, Julian," I said, opening my briefcase and sliding a stack of documents across the table. "I used the valuation. I leveraged the future output of the violet vein to buy out the banks that were about to foreclose on your failed tech acquisitions. You over-leveraged the company to fight me, and in doing so, you handed me the keys to the front door." One of the board members, an elderly woman who'd known my grandmother, leaned forward to examine the papers. Her eyes widened. "She's right, Arthur. She's consolidated the debt. If we don't meet her terms, she can trigger a liquidation of the company's physical assets by noon tomorrow." My father sank back into his chair. "Terms? You're here to blackmail your own father?" "I'm here to offer you a way out," I said, leaning forward. "Step down. Resign as CEO and chairman. Julian, you resign as VP of operations. In exchange, I'll fold Sterling Industries into the Vane Sterling Consortium. I'll clear the personal debts you've accrued trying to fix the stock price, and I'll keep you out of bankruptcy court." "And if we refuse?" Julian hissed. "Then I liquidate," I said simply. "I sell the building, I sell the equipment, and I keep the land. You'll be left with nothing but the lawsuits from the botched break-in at my site. And believe me, Miller is already talking to the DA. He isn't interested in going to prison for a family that can't even pay his bail." The room went silent. I watched my father look at the faces of the board members, men and women who'd stood by him for decades. Not one of them looked back at me. They were looking at the violet vein. They were looking at the person who had the power to save their pensions. "You do this to us?" my father whispered. "After everything we gave you?" "You gave me a garbage heap, Dad. You gave me the cold shoulder. You gave me a lesson in how to be ruthless. I'm just showing you that I was a very good student. You taught me that family is a liability in business. I'm just following your curriculum." With a shaking hand, my father reached for a pen. Julian tried to stop him, shouting about fighting back and appeals, but my father pushed him away. He knew it was over. He signed the resignation papers, the ink bleeding into the expensive vellum. "Get out," he said, not looking at me. "Take the company, take the name. Just leave us alone. The name stays with the company, but the land is mine. I'll have the rest of your things moved out of the office by the end of the day."
As I walked out of the boardroom, I heard Julian start to scream at the board, but his voice was muffled by the closing doors. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the city. My dump on the periphery was visible from here, a small patch of violet earth that had swallowed a dynasty. Silas caught up to me at the elevator. That was efficient. What now, Madam Chairwoman? Now, I said, feeling the weight of the papers in my hand. We start the real work. I want the environmental cleanup of the surrounding lots to begin immediately. I want the illegal dumping sites cleared. We're going to heal the land this family tried to kill. I stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, I saw my reflection in the polished chrome. I didn't look like the girl in the muddy boots anymore, but I still felt the dirt beneath my fingernails, the dirt that had saved me. I pulled out my phone and sent a one-word message to my mother. Finished. And then I blocked her number for good.
Time has a way of solidifying things, not just minerals, but reputations. 6 months after the coup, the name Sterling no longer stood for old money arrogance, but for a technological revolution. I had moved the headquarters from the suffocating skyscraper in the city to a state-of-the-art facility built right on the edge of the original lot. I wanted to see the earth I was working with every single day. But as the Violet Dawn project, the world's first zero-emission superconductor plant, prepared for its global launch, I realized that when you become the sun, everyone wants to steal your light. The morning air was crisp, scented with the faint metallic tang of the refinement processors. From my balcony, the once barren garbage heap looked like a futuristic oasis. High-tech silos rose from the ground, surrounded by lush green belts where the soil had been painstakingly remediated. I had spent millions cleaning up the toxins my father had dumped here, turning a scar into a sanctuary. The efficiency ratings are at 98%, Alina, Silas said, joining me. He had become my most trusted advisor, the only one who didn't look at me with either fear or fawning greed. The first batch of pure coltan Z is ready for the satellite launch contracts. We aren't just selling rocks anymore, we're selling the backbone of the next century. It's beautiful, isn't it? I whispered. To think they wanted to turn this into a parking lot for industrial waste. They're still watching, you know, Silas cautioned, nodding toward the perimeter. And I don't mean your parents. We've intercepted 3 ghost signals in our network this week. Industrial espionage at a sovereign level. Someone wants the green extraction blueprints, and they aren't going to use a lawyer to get them. I knew the risks. My technology allowed for the extraction of rare minerals without the devastating ecological footprint of traditional mining. It was a multi-trillion-dollar secret. If a rival nation or a rogue corporation got hold of it, they could dominate the market and destroy the environment simultaneously. But my focus was interrupted by a notification on my private terminal, a security breach, but not at the gates. Someone was using an old legacy biometric override at the secondary archives, a code that should have been deleted. Julian, I hissed. My brother had kept a backup of his old security credentials from a period 10 years ago when the system wasn't fully digitized. He had slipped past the main grid by knowing the blind spots of the building he had helped design. I didn't call security. I went myself. I found him in the basement archives, frantically trying to download encrypted geological maps onto a handheld drive. He looked ragged, his expensive suit replaced by a cheap jacket, his face thin and desperate. "Looking for a career change, Julian?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. He jumped, the drive clattering to the floor. "Alina, I just needed what's mine. Dad is losing the house. The lawyers are taking everything to pay for the Miller trial. You have billions, and we're living in a 2-bedroom apartment." You had 60% of the shares. You had the mansion. You had the legacy. Now you lost it all because you were too lazy to look beneath the surface. Now you're trying to sell my research to the highest bidder? Who is it? The Volkov Group? The Beijing Syndicate? They offered me $10 million.
he screamed, his voice echoing in the concrete room. 10 million just for the structural mapping of the vein. That's nothing to you, but it's a life for us. It's a death sentence for this land, I countered. If they get those maps, they'll use frack leaching to pull the minerals from the surrounding lots. They'll poison the entire water table for a 50-mile radius just to get a faster yield. You're not just stealing from me, you're selling out the world. I don't care about the world, he sobbed, collapsing against a shelf of old ledgers. I just want to be a Sterling again. I want people to look at me without laughing. I looked at him, my older brother, the golden boy, and I felt nothing but a cold, heavy pity. He was a hollow shell, held together by the thin veneer of a name that no longer meant what he thought it did. The name Sterling belongs to the people who work this land, Julian, not to the people who tried to destroy it. Give me the contact info for the people who hired you, now. And if you do, he looked up, a glimmer of pathetic hope in his eyes. Will you help us? Will you give Dad enough to keep the estate? If you do, I said, I won't call the police. I'll let you walk out of here, but if I ever see you near a Sterling site again, I'll release the recordings of you offering to sell out national resource security. You won't just be poor, Julian, you'll be a traitor. He scribbled a number on a piece of paper and practically ran for the exit. I watched him go, knowing that he would spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. He hadn't just lost his fortune, he had lost his humanity. I handed the number to Silas. Trace this. It's the Volkov Group. They're setting up a front company in the Baltics. They're the ones behind the ghost signals. We should go to the authorities, Silas said. No, I replied, a slow smile forming. We're going to feed them the data, but not the real data. We're going to give them a version of the refinement process that only works with our specific purified catalysts. They'll spend billions building a factory that produces nothing but expensive sludge. If they want to play dirty, I'll show them how deep the mud really goes. Over the next few weeks, we executed the honeypot operation. We let the Volkov spies steal the corrupted files. I watched the global markets with the eyes of a hawk. I saw their shell companies buying up land near other mineral deposits, heard the whispers of a Sterling killer technology being built in secret. Meanwhile, our production reached its zenith. The Violet Dawn wasn't just a plant, it was a promise. We provided the superconductors for the first global clean energy grid. The garbage heap was now the heart of a greener world. One evening, I sat on the porch of my modular home. My mother called. For some reason, I decided to pick up. "Alina?" she whispered. "Your father, he passed away an hour ago. A heart attack. He was shouting about the stock prices until the very end. He didn't leave a will, dear. There's nothing left but the debts." "I know, Mother," I said. "Will you come to the funeral, for the sake of appearances? People are talking." "No," I said, looking at the thriving forest I had planted on the north side of the lot. "I'm busy planting trees, and as for appearances, the only thing that matters is what's real. Goodbye, Margaret." I hung up and looked at the ground. I felt a strange sense of peace. The man who had disowned me was gone, and the empire he had built on vanity had been replaced by an empire built on stone. I wasn't the black sheep anymore. I was the shepherd. I stood up and walked into the lab. There was still so much more to find beneath the surface, and I was the only one who knew where to dig.
They say that a secret is a living thing. The longer you keep it buried, the deeper its roots grow. My grandmother, Beatrice, wasn't just a woman of wealth. She was a woman of foresight. As my drills pushed past the 4,000-foot mark, descending into depths that no geological survey had ever dared to explore, I began to realize that the Coltan Z wasn't the final destination. It was a shell, a protective layer. Beneath the violet treasure lay something that challenged everything I knew about the history of this land and the woman who left it to me. The vibration in the command center changed at 3:14 a.m. It wasn't the usual rhythmic thrum of the diamond-tipped drills. It was a high-pitched, harmonic whine that resonated through the floorboards and made the coffee in my mug ripple in perfect concentric circles. "Elena, we've hit something," the head engineer, Sarah, whispered into the comms. "It's not rock. The sensors are returning a zero-density reading, but the drill has stopped dead. It's like we've hit a vacuum, or a shield." I hurried to the shaft head. The air coming from the deep vent didn't smell like sulfur or ancient dust. It smelled of ozone and rain, the exact same scent that lingered in Grandma Beatrice's greenhouse back at the old estate. "Send down the crawler," I commanded. "I want eyes on that depth." We sat in the dark, watching the feed from the remote-operated vehicle. The screen flickered with static as the crawler descended through the violet strata. Then, at 4,200 feet, the walls of the cavern changed. The jagged rock smoothed out into a translucent, crystalline structure that looked less like a mineral deposit and more like a cathedral of glass. In the center of the chamber sat a massive, pulsating core of pure, iridescent white light. It was a geode the size of a city block, radiating energy that spiked our meters off the charts. "It's a natural fusion pocket," Silas whispered, standing behind me. "Elena, this isn't just a mineral mine. This is a planetary battery. If we tap into this, we aren't just powering a grid, we're powering a civilization. For free." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I pulled out the small silver locket Grandma gave me on her deathbed, the one I'd never been able to open. As I held it near the monitor, the locket clicked. Inside wasn't a photo, but a micro-etched map of this exact chamber. On the back of the map, a single sentence was carved in a language I recognized from her old notebooks. "The earth gives only to those who promise not to take it all." She knew. She had known her entire life. She hadn't left me a garbage heap to make me rich. She had left me a sanctuary to protect. The Coltan Z was just the bait to ensure I had the resources to defend the real prize, the Lumina core. "We have to announce this, Elena," Silas said, his eyes bright with the fever of discovery. "The global implications, poverty, energy wars, climate change, it all ends here. You'll be more than a CEO. You'll be the person who saved the world." "Or the person who gave the world a reason to tear itself apart," I countered, looking at the pulsating light. "Think about it, Silas. If the Volkovs or the syndicates find out there's an infinite energy source under a garbage heap in the suburbs, they won't send spies. They'll send armies. Even the government would seize this in a heartbeat." I looked at the map in my hand. Grandma Beatrice hadn't been a geologist. She had been a guardian. And now the mantle was mine. I spent the next 48 hours in total isolation, cross-referencing Beatrice's journals with the new sensor data. I found the hidden truth. The Lumina core was unstable if extracted. It wasn't meant to be mined. It was meant to be bridged. It was an organic part of the tectonic quake, a biological mechanical hybrid that seemed to respond to the environment around it. If I tried to monetize it the way I had the Coltan Z, the core would collapse, likely taking the entire city with it in a seismic event. My mother chose that exact moment to make her final, desperate move. She didn't come with lawyers this time. She came with a stranger, a man from the Global Energy Commission, or so her credentials claimed. "Elena, darling," Margaret said, her voice brittle as she stood in the lobby of my facility, "this is Director Varga. He's very interested in your deep vein readings. He says the seismic tremors you're causing are a matter of public safety. He's authorized to take control of the site." Varga looked at me with the cold, predatory eyes of a man who had spent his career nationalizing other people's hard work. "You know about the anomaly at 4,000 feet, Miss Sterling. You can't hide a signature that large.
You can hand over the keys now, or we can declare this a disaster zone and remove you by force." My mother smiled, a flicker of her old triumph returning. "You see, Elena, you should have shared. Now you get nothing." I looked at Margaret, the woman who would sell the very ground she stood on for a seat at a table that no longer existed. Then I looked at Varga. They didn't see a wonder of the world. They saw a battery they could drain. "You want the anomaly?" I asked, my voice echoing in the glass lobby. "Fine, but you should know that the Lumina core has a failsafe. It's tied to my biometric signature. If anyone else attempts to breach the Crystal Cathedral, the core will phase shift. You'll be left with 4,000 feet of worthless glass and a crater where this facility stands." It was a bluff, mostly, but Beatrice's notes mentioned a resonance lock. I just had to hope my blood was the key. Varga hesitated. "You're lying. You're trying to protect your monopoly." "Test me," I said, stepping towards him. "I've lived in a trailer, I've been disowned, and I've dug through toxic waste to find my truth. I have nothing to lose. Do you? Can your commission handle the fallout of a localized tectonic collapse because you were too greedy to listen to the owner of the land?" I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He wasn't a scientist, he was a bureaucrat, and bureaucrats hate risks they can't quantify. "I'll give you 24 hours to produce a safety report," Vargas spat, turning on his heel. "But don't think this is over." As they left, my mother lingered for a second. "You're just like her," she hissed. "Beatrice was a fool who lived in the dirt, and you're going to die in it." "I'd rather die in the dirt than live in your cage, Mother," I replied. I watched them drive away. Then I turned back to Silas. "Seal the shaft. We're not mining any deeper. We're going to build a different kind of bridge. We're going to use the energy to power the world, but from within the earth. No extraction, no destruction." I looked down at the violet ground. The treasure was safe for now, but the real war, the war for the soul of the planet, had just begun.
Power is a strange thing. When you have none, you think it's a destination. When you have it all, you realize it's a burden that never lets you sleep. The Lumina core was no longer just a discovery. It was a living, breathing responsibility buried deep beneath my feet. I had stopped the drills, but the world wouldn't stop knocking. To protect the core, I had to make it useful. I had to build the resonance gate, a way to broadcast the energy without tearing the earth apart. But as the first towers rose, the shadows of my past returned, and this time they brought fire. The gate was a marvel of engineering, a series of harmonic spires that acted as tuning forks for the Lumina core's frequency. We weren't mining the energy, we were singing it to the surface and then beaming it to receiving stations across the coast. It was wireless, clean, and utterly revolutionary. But the more the spires glowed with that iridescent white light, the larger the target on my back became. "The resonance is stable, Elena," Silas said, his eyes bloodshot from 3 days of monitoring. "The city's backup grid is now running entirely on the gate's broadcast. We've done it. We've made the garbage heap the heart of the modern world." "But at what cost?" I asked, looking at the radar. Varga's commission is silent, which is never a good sign, and Julian has disappeared from the radar entirely. My answer came at 11 p.m. in the form of a thermal bloom on the southern perimeter. This wasn't a spy or a bureaucrat. It was a tactical assault. 2 armored trucks smashed through the reinforced gates, followed by a swarm of figures in dark, non-reflective gear. "Intruder alert! Lockdown initiated!" the AI's voice boomed. I watched the monitors in horror. One of the figures stepped into the light of the security flares and removed his helmet. It was Julian. But he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was a man I recognized from Interpol's most wanted list, Vaskov, a freelance destabilizer hired by those who preferred the world to stay addicted to oil and coal. "Elena!" Julian's voice crackled over the site-wide intercom. He sounded manic, his eyes wide with a terrifying mix of greed and desperation. "I told you I'd be a Sterling again. We're not here for the data anymore. We're here for the source. Vaskov has enough liquid nitrogen to flash freeze your fail-safe sensors. We're going down to the core, and we're taking it." "Julian, you'll kill us all!" I screamed into the mic. "The core is tied to the tectonic stability of the entire region. If you freeze the resonance, the pressure will have nowhere to go. It'll be an 8.0 earthquake in seconds." "Lies," Julian laughed. "You just want to keep the god powers for yourself. You always were the selfish one, Elena. Dad died because of you. Mom is a pariah because of you. Now you're going to give me the biometric bypass, Elena. Now." I looked at Silas. He's going to trigger a collapse. He doesn't understand the physics. He just thinks it's a battery he can pull out of a toy. "We can't send our security down there," Silas whispered. "If there's a firefight near the Crystal Cathedral, the vibrations alone could start the chain reaction. We have to stop them before they hit the shaft elevator." "I'm going down," I said, reaching for my override key. "He's my brother. He's my ghost. I'm the only one who can talk him off the ledge." I met them at the elevator's sublevel. The air was cold, the liquid nitrogen canisters hissing like angry snakes. Vaskov's men had their rifles leveled at my chest, but Julian stepped forward, looking at me with a twisted sort of pride. "The black sheep returns to the fold," he sneered. "Give me the biometric bypass, Elena, now." "Look at this place, Julian," I gestured to the glowing spires above us. "This is what Grandma Beatrice wanted. Not a bank account, a future. You're about to destroy the only thing that actually makes our name worth something." "Our name is worth whatever people are willing to pay for it. And right now, Vaskov's employers are willing to pay enough to buy a small country." "And where will you put that country when the ground opens up?" I asked, stepping closer. "Julian, look at the readings. The core is already reacting to your presence. It's a resonance-based entity. It feels your hostility. The spikes are already at critical." As if on cue, the floor beneath us groaned. A low-frequency hum, deep and bone-shaking, rose from the depths. Dust shook from the ceiling. Vaskov looked nervous, his finger twitching on the trigger. "He's right, Julian. The ground is moving. This wasn't in the brief." "She's bluffing," Julian screamed, lunging for the keycard around my neck. We struggled, and in the chaos, a canister of nitrogen fell, cracking open on the floor. A cloud of freezing white mist erupted, obscuring everything. I felt the ground lurch, a violent upward thrust that threw everyone to the floor. The Luminicore wasn't just reacting, it was defending itself. "The failsafe!" I shouted. "It's initiating! Julian, get out! The elevator shaft is going to collapse!" Vaskov didn't wait. He and his men scrambled for the stairs, abandoning the mission and the man who hired them. But Julian was frozen, staring at the elevator doors as they buckled under the tectonic pressure. He realized, too late, that he had brought a knife to a planetary fight. I grabbed Julian by the collar and dragged him toward the emergency stairs. "Move, you idiot, unless you want to be part of the geological record." The climb was a nightmare of falling debris and white-hot light as the resonance gate bled off the excess energy to prevent a total explosion. We burst through the surface exit just as the secondary fence collapsed into a sinkhole. I stood there, gasping for air, watching the spires glow with a blinding, terrifying intensity. Then, as quickly as it started, the light faded back to a soft violet. The core had stabilized. The gate had held. Julian lay in the mud, sobbing.
He was covered in dirt, the same dirt he had mocked me for. Silas and the security team surrounded him, but I just stood there, looking at the horizon. "Take him away," I said, my voice dead. "Give the police the recordings. Give them the nitrogen canisters. Tell them it was an act of domestic terrorism." "Elena," Julian whimpered, looking up at me. "I just wanted—" "I know what you wanted, Julian. You wanted the surface, but you never had the strength for the depths." I looked at my lot. The garbage heap was scarred again, but beneath it, the light was still there. And for the first time, I realized that protecting a treasure is a war that never truly ends.
They say that time heals all wounds, but I believe it simply petrifies them, turns them into something solid, something you can build upon. 10 years have passed since the night the earth screamed. The world outside these gates has changed beyond recognition, driven by the pulse of the Limina core. We didn't just build a factory here, we built a cathedral of science. The garbage heap is gone, replaced by a sanctuary where the air is always sweet and the ground beneath your feet feels alive. My journey started with a handful of dirt and a heart full of resentment. It ends with a planet that finally has room to breathe. I stood on the observation deck of the Great Spire, looking out over the city. The horizon was no longer choked with the gray haze of coal and oil. Instead, thin ribbons of iridescent white light, the resonance streams, crisscrossed the sky, providing silent, infinite energy to millions. My reflection in the glass looked older, wiser. I wore a simple lab coat, the Sterling family crest long ago replaced by the symbol of the Lumina Trust. I had spent the last decade ensuring that the core remained a public utility, protected by international treaties that I had practically dictated from this very room. "The global grid is at full capacity, Elena," Silas said, stepping beside me. He had gray in his hair now, but his eyes still held that same spark of wonder. "The last of the old carbon plants was decommissioned this morning. You did it, Elena. You officially closed the book on the old world." "It was never just me, Silas," I said, touching the glass. "It was the land. It just needed someone to listen to it." My assistant entered, holding a tablet with a hesitant look. "Miss Sterling, there is a request for a visitor's pass from the state penitentiary. It's Julian. He's up for parole next month, and he's asking for a meeting. He says he has information about your mother." I didn't even have to think about it. Deny it, and tell the parole board that the Lumina Trust will not be providing any character references. Julian had his chance at the surface. He chose the dark. "And your mother?" Silas asked quietly. "Margaret is exactly where she chose to be, living in a small apartment in the city, supported by a modest annuity I set up for her, anonymously, of course. She still tells her neighbors she's the queen mother of the Sterling Empire. Some delusions are too deep to dig out." I walked down to the ground level, passing through the internal gardens. Where there once were rusted tires and toxic barrels, there were now ancient ferns and bioluminescent flowers that thrived on the core's resonance. I had turned the dumping ground into the most biodiverse acre on the continent. I reached the small, secluded corner of the lot where it all began, the spot where I had taken my first core sample. There, a simple granite bench sat under an oak tree. Next to it was a modest headstone I'd had moved from the old family plot. Beatrice Sterling. She knew the depths. I sat on the bench, feeling the familiar hum of the earth. I thought about the girl who cried in a lawyer's office while her family laughed at her garbage heap. I wish I could tell her that the dirt she was holding was actually the seeds of a new world. "Elena!" a young voice called out. A group of students from the Lumina Academy were walking through the gardens on a field trip. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, ran up to me. She was holding a small piece of violet-tinted rock she'd found near the old tailing piles. "Is it true? Is it true that this place used to be a dump? That people didn't want it?" I took the rock from her hand, feeling its faint, warm vibration. It's true. People only saw what was on the surface, the trash, the rust, the shame. They didn't realize that the most beautiful things are often hidden under what the world rejects. "How did you know to look?" the girl asked. "Because someone I loved told me that the earth gives only to those who promise not to take it all," I said, handing the stone back to her. "Remember that. If you respect the ground, it will carry you forever." The sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of deep violet and gold, the colors of the core. As the lights of the great spire began to pulse, I realized that my work was finally done. The garbage heap wasn't just a mine or a power plant anymore. It was a testament. I stood up and walked toward the main gates. The Sterling name was no longer a burden. It was a promise kept. I had been given a wasteland, and I had returned a garden. I looked back one last time at the shimmering spires. My grandmother didn't leave me a fortune. She left me a purpose. And as I stepped out into the cool evening air, I knew that beneath the surface, the light would always be there, waiting for those who weren't afraid to get their hands dirty. My name is Elena Sterling. I am the keeper of the earth. And my story is no longer written in ink, but in the very bedrock of the world.